ESPN does not like good players being in small markets. Now, this is not a fringe NFL conspiracy theory created by paranoid fans of small market teams. No, this is a group consensus made by millions of fans who have recognized this bias after years of evaluating how ESPN chooses to cover big named athletes when they are not in big name markets or franchises. This is not exclusive to the NFL and is honestly more blatant in the NBA, but it is a thing nonetheless in the NFL. The second OBJ landed in Cleveland, they fixated on how OBJ can get traded to a more desirable market or a more desirable franchise. LeBron James never spun a meaningful season in Cleveland without speculation of him leaving for a bigger market or franchise. But today, I am not defending Cleveland against ESPN. Today, I am defending the Cincinnati Bengals. Why? Well, because the Bengals have had unfair narratives put on them about the health of their organization, and it's been done in the name of protecting Joe Burrow. So in this video, I will set out to prove that Stephen A. Smith has put out misleading rhetoric about the Bengals as an organization. ESPN has also fabricated the tension between Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals to further a narrative, and also to prove that ESPN definitively has an anti-small market bias. So let's talk about it. ESPN is and always will be a sports media corporation. They do not exist to enhance the game. They do not exist to give fans of sports teams quality information. They exist solely to make as much money as possible on those sports as they can. That is their goal as a company. So that being said, I don't think ESPN, the corporation, actually forces their analysts to say what they say, but they definitely make sure to hire and prop up the people who are more likely to promote the ideas that benefit the motives of the corporation. This is why ESPN has become so homogenous over the years. So if you're an older fan out there and you ever wonder why ESPN is so much different than what it was when you watched it when it was first started, it's because fundamentally ESPN is entirely different. It is no longer just a sports cable news channel. It is a gigantic platform of sports. So that being said, it's not insane to suggest that ESPN would have a small market bias. It honestly makes sense because, again, ESPN wants to prop up ideals that are going to make them the most money, and small markets, to them, in their mind, don't make them the most money. But yet, there are some ESPN diehards, they do exist, I'm surprised too, that think that ESPN is still this fair and just news organization, and that what I'm saying is just a conspiracy made up by butthurt small market fans that live in undesirable areas. But it's clearly not. And in no case is this more clear than what happened in last year's NBA draft. Zion Williamson was set to be that year's #1 consensus overall pick and projected to be the biggest star since LeBron James to enter the draft. At the same time, the New York Knicks had the worst record in the NBA and seemed poised to pick and draft Zion Williamson. Again, the biggest star to enter the NBA since LeBron James would be joining the biggest franchise in the nation's largest market. So, of course, that ideal got a ton of positive press.
Would love him at Madison Square Garden. It would be special with him and Porzingis. It would be box office. I would love it.
They would have two players, the Knicks, if they got Zion Williamson, who are both unicorns and black swans. Porzingis is imaginary, a 7'3" guy who plays the way he can. Zion Williamson's imaginary. That doesn't exist. If Zion Williamson pans out to be an MVP caliber, even just perennial all-star player, in New York City above the rim with Kristaps Porzingis, he will be the #1 star in sports in the world, on planet Earth. And the fact that he gets that the Knicks are a laughingstock makes me like him even more.
I think he has a chance to be one of the most special players we've ever seen. And if he does get lucky to go to a team like the Knicks.
Now, a few key words to notice that was in that little clip. The pairing of Zion and then injured Kristaps Porzingis would be magical and revolutionary. They said unicorn. Max at least acknowledges that the Knicks have been a bottom 5 organization in all of sports for at least a half a decade, but that doesn't seem to deter him from encouraging this from happening. Interesting. And Jason Williams goes as far to say that Zion Williamson would be lucky to end up with the New York Knicks. Now let's do some research on the New York Knicks. The New York Knicks have not been at or over 500 since 2013. They have spent 6 years under 400. In that time frame since 2013, they have had 5 different head coaches. They also are owned by James Dolan. James Dolan, of the famous Dolan family, if you're a Cleveland Indians fan. And he is the worst owner of the bunch, which is saying a lot. And he's widely considered, along with Dan Snyder, as one of the worst sports owners in history. Also, during this season, Kristaps Porzingis declared that he wanted out of the New York Knicks, partly and mainly because they are a dumpster fire of an organization. So with all of that evidence on the table, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the New York Knicks are an organization that a top player should avoid if they are worried about that player's future. That a player in that kind of situation should pull a power play to avoid having to have so much of their career in such dysfunction. Notice how those elements of the New York Knicks were ignored completely to focus on hyping up the upside of Zion Williamson and one-legged Kristaps Porzingis, who doesn't even want to play for the Knicks at this point. So now, knowing how they reacted to Zion going to such a hapless franchise as the New York Knicks, let's see how they react when a much better franchise in the New Orleans Pelicans get the #1 overall pick.
Do you think Zion should pull the power play to avoid the Pelicans?
Yeah, if that's what he wants to do.
Yep. The power play narrative is in full effect, despite the fact that he got saved from going to one of the worst organizations in sports. The fact that that organization is not in New York is now reason enough for a power play. And this is the bias of ESPN in full display. The power play narrative is not about empowering athletes to get an athlete to a better organization. They are not about looking out for the athlete's best interests. It's about how the media wants to push players to markets that benefit them. Anything else is window dressing when it comes to that. Now, that being said, let's look at the example that I'm here to talk about. Stephen A. versus the Bengals. Now, a huge part of these media pushes are to trash whatever small market team is in position to receive a coveted player. Sometimes a team is in that spot that is more deserving of it than others, like Cleveland in 2017 and Cleveland in 2018, and even Arizona in 2019 kind of deserved some of the skepticism they got, but none of the prizes of those drafts were as coveted as Joe Burrow. So it makes sense that when the Bengals get the #1 pick in 2020, they are being painted as one of the worst franchises to ever walk the earth. That is simply not true. It's honestly one of the most attractive destinations for a consensus #1 type quarterback to have to land to. Maybe Andrew Luck comes close, but if you look at the Colts roster at the time and you look at the Bengals roster at this time, it's clear that the Bengals have a better roster and situation than Andrew Luck had coming in to Indianapolis. They have legitimate weapons at wide receiver, A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, and a John Ross that has underperformed, but ultimately runs a 4.2 40. At running back, they have Joe Mixon and Gio Bernard, which is very good backfield. Joe Mixon's very versatile. He can actually help you in the pass game. The line of the Cincinnati Bengals is admittedly a question mark, but they do theoretically have cap space to address that. And also, they have Jonah Williams coming back from injury, who was thought to be one of the best left tackles in last year's draft, and admittedly was the only guy I have actually seen block Myles Garrett in college. So there's actually a ton of upside to the Bengals. But let's see how Stephen A. Smith chooses to cover the situation.
The Cincinnati Bengals are an embarrassment. They're just a horrible, horrible franchise. They're notoriously cheap. We all know this. The reason why Marvin Lewis lasted 16 years is because Mike Brown wasn't trying to compete. Mike Brown was sitting up there and underpaying folks all the time.
Let's check this, because I hear this a lot, that the Bengals underpaid their own players. But for some reason, the Bengals also have a history of being able to retain their own players for the most part. So I went in and looked at their history of retaining key players, the guys that you associate their name with the Bengals organization. Well, in 2004, they gave Carson Palmer an unprecedented 10-year, $118 million deal that was most certainly at the time not considered cheap, even by Carson Palmer, who signed a contract. In 2006, Chad Johnson, now Chad Ochocinco, maybe back to Chad, I don't know what his name is these days, but he signed a 6-year, $35 million deal that was categorized by ESPN as a monster deal. So most certainly doesn't seem like it's cheap. Then let's jump to 2014, when the Bengals re-signed Andy Dalton to a 6-year, $96 million contract. Again, I wouldn't call that underpaid. Actually, the Bengals have been criticized for overpaying Andy Dalton. So this ideal that they underpaid their own players, it's just not true.
It is not a quality franchise, and I think you can serve to sully and stain and potentially ruin a guy like
I'm with you. I'm with you on that.
That's all I'm saying. So when I'm looking at Joe Burrow, all I'm trying to say to you is this: football is a it's a real team sport. You need a multitude of levels all working in concert with one another. That's not going to happen in Cincinnati. If we truly, truly care about this Ohio native, this kid Joe Burrow, make sure he goes anywhere but to Cincinnati.
Well, see, he mentions the fact that football is a team sport, but doesn't mention the actual team that Joe Burrow would be going to. And then he dresses his either bad faith or underdeveloped take into a plea for the athlete. If we care about Joe Burrow, okay, where should Joe Burrow demand to go? That's much better than Cincinnati. DC? Should he go to Washington, D.C. and Dan Snyder? That's a truly dysfunctional situation. It's bad arguments like these that make me wonder if Joe Burrow were slotted to go to the Jets or the Chargers or even the Giants. Would these arguments be made despite these franchises' history of mediocrity and not winning Super Bowls? I think not.
This is what he said further on. I do have leverage, have their process, the Bengals do, and I have my process. We haven't even gotten to the NFL Combine yet. There's a lot of things that happen leading up to the draft and a lot of information gathered. So
now, this one is honestly just a pure work of fabrication. And what I mean by this is not that they created the quote, but the controversy surrounding the quote is completely created. Because there is key information kept out by ESPN when they present this narrative that is so clearly not in support of this narrative that I'd honestly have to believe that the anchors and producers who run these segments and shows are complete idiots, not to know about this information. So in order for me to think that the people at ESPN are actually competent, I have to assume that they are willingly ignoring the other quotes in the article. What is the quote that I'm talking about that's in the same article? Where it's where Joe Burrow says, going back to Ohio would be an interesting thought and a lot of fun. Kind of doesn't jive with the whole narrative that they've been pushing, that Joe Burrow is using his leverage to stay out of Cincinnati. Also, him and his parents have come out in disbelief of this narrative. They have no idea where this narrative came from and how this even got created in the first place. But neither get mentioned when the media goes to push this narrative. Even the fact that Joe Burrow has refuted this narrative has not stopped them. But they kept pushing this narrative that Joe didn't want to go to the Bengals to the point to where it became so obvious that people started speaking out. And then when ESPN is caught in the corner and caught in their lie, what did they do? Well, they just shifted gears with this narrative.
He reports that Joe Burrow, when he met with the Cincinnati Bengals last week in a meeting that everyone suggested went extraordinarily well, told the Bengals he wants the team to keep A.J. Green. Again, that's Peter King's reporting. Now, you know that over the weekend, our Dan Graziano and Jeremy Fowler reported that the Bengals plan to use the franchise tag on A.J. Green. So those two things may not be coincidental. So
now, it's not that Joe doesn't want to play in Cincinnati. That's not the narrative anymore. It's that Joe is going to call all the shots. That's the narrative, which is false. Because they present this as if Joe had this power meeting with the Cincinnati Bengals and demanded that they keep A.J. Green, forcing a Bengals team that was not interested in keeping A.J. Green, that was not interested in re-signing A.J. Green, and A.J. Green that was not interested in re-signing with the Bengals. Yes, it's forcing them to put the franchise tag on A.J. Green, when in reality, the idea of an A.J. Green franchise tag in Cincinnati has been out for like 3 months. 3 months. And most reports from Cincinnati, from the people who actually know A.J. Green, would suggest that A.J. Green really, really, really wants to play for the Bengals and is willing to do what it takes to make it happen. And again, the Bengals have a history of doing what it takes to make it happen with their own players. So this narrative that Joe Burrow sat in a chair and told the Bengals what to do and that Joe's going to make the Bengals a better franchise is false. Now, why do I care? Well, it's because I'm tired of it. I'm tired of the misinformation and half-truths that always surround a small market team when they get something nice. I'm tired of the paranoia that those half-truths and misinformation creates in the fan base of small market teams when they finally do get something nice. I am tired of this notion that if something doesn't happen in LA or New York, it's not cool, that it's not desirable for the players. I am tired of small market teams consistently being the punching bag of the national media so they can push their narratives and get everybody to their big media markets so they can make the most money possible. It's not healthy for the games. It's not healthy for the teams. It's not healthy for the fans or the players. All it does is create unnecessary stress in all previously mentioned camps. It's exhausting and creates an environment that only encourages 5 or 6 franchises at a time. It's an environment that encourages for big cities to have 4 or 5 teams because that's the only place that you can have good players, right? If you have a team in New York. This focus on getting big names to all the big cities has actually hurt the NBA this season, as their TV ratings, both locally and nationally, have been awful. I'm already sad to see the NBA, which looked like it was going to grow at a great level, have its growth stunted by this ideology. And I don't want to see the same happen to the NFL. Sports are better when all teams in all markets feel like they have a chance to compete, not when 5 teams in 4 markets feel like they have a chance to compete. But if you go into it knowing that your team will not get good things simply because your city is not big and cool enough, or your franchise is not big and cool enough, then what is the point? That's all I have to say for this week. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you like this video, if you like what I talk about, if you like what I do here, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, ding the notification bell so you can be notified when I upload. But thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.